Fear Not, Episode 122. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today, you and I are going to be joined by Susan Berkley. Welcome, Susan. How are you today?
I'm great, Billy. It's great to be back and an honor to be on your show.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you back on, and this time as a specialist, so thank you so much for coming back. And for those of you who don't know, Susan is a professional voice talent, teacher, CEO of the Great Voice Company, and author of Speak to Influence, How to Unlock the Hidden Power of Your Voice. As the voice of AT&T and Citibank, she's one of the most listened to of voices in America. In addition, Susan's voice has performed on hundreds of broadcast and non-broadcast productions, including promos for Lifetime, the Travel Channel, and CNBC. She's also been featured in the New York Times, as well as making appearances on CNBC and the ABC News. Susan, can you take those few extra moments just to fill in those gaps and maybe also give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
That's great. Sure. So I've been a professional speaker, broadcaster, and entrepreneur now for, close to 30 years. And I started in radio, worked with a guy named Howard Stern, who I'm sure you've heard of, right, Billy?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah. So I was on his show in the 1980s, right before he went national. I did his traffic, and he called me Susan Berserkowitz on the air. And, it was very, very interesting. I learned a lot about being on the show, and my job was like kind of getting beaten up on the air. And but it was funny, very, very funny. A lot of the stuff that he did with me, though, ended up in the annals of the FCC on their for their obscenity hearings about Howard. And so I was very conflicted being on that show. I was, on the one hand, I became very, very famous, and I was on the number one rated radio show in the country, and it was pretty cool being on his show. He's actually a very nice guy off the air, and now time will tell. All these years later, he's proven himself to be a savvy business person and quite an entertainer. But in my heart, this just was not what I signed up to do. I had these dreams of being a top broadcaster, like I know a lot of people do, have a passion for being behind the mic. But, when everything panned out, I really was kind of like a slave to big media, and I'm kind of tied to Howard with golden handcuffs. And I wanted to go out on my own. I wanted to start my own career as a voice talent, I thought. And so I leaped, and I didn't have a net. And I think that might be something that a lot of your listeners can relate to, Billy. Wouldn't you say? You don't have fear about going out on their own?
Yeah, very much so.
And so that's what happened. I took that leap, and I was young, and I thought in my arrogant, youthful way that I would immediately rise to the top and be like the number one voice talent in America, And I leaped, and I'm living in New York City. I quit Howard's show, and nothing happened. All of a sudden, all of these great voiceover jobs that I imagined would materialize, none of them did, and I found myself working all of these terrible day jobs just to make ends meet. I was a waitress, which is, noble work. A lot of people have done it. I was worked as a telemarketer, but I was selling deodorant crystals to funeral homes, which didn't last very long. And then I got a job for a singing telegram company, which is called Rent-A-Yenta, it being New York City. And that lasted until they gave me a little costume, a little elf costume to wear and sing a singing telegram to the people that were putting on fall fashion shows, except it was July in New York City, about 100 degrees outside, and here I am shuffling down 7th Avenue dressed as a Christmas elf, right? And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. So that propelled me into starting my own business, and I did. It's the Great Voice Company, and we train voice talent and people in corporations and all over America who want to improve their speaking skills. And so over the years, Billy, I've worked with a lot of speakers who are phobic and helped a lot of people who want to start businesses as voice actors overcome the procrastination that they go through in trying to launch a business, because it can be very overwhelming for some people.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping that you would talk to us today, because I know that's one of the areas that you really do, like you said, you focus on, is to help people with procrastination, which is a huge problem. So I was hoping you could help us understand exactly what procrastination is.
Yeah, I think we all know it. Everybody's got those to-do lists that never get finished and those projects that stay on the back burner. But it's much, much more than that. I think there are certain things in our lives that are really important to us, and we put them off. Whether it could be as simple as starting a diet or an exercise program, or more importantly, really taking the risk of starting a business or a dream project for yourself that your heart is really calling you to do. And it might be professional, or it might be something that you want to do on the side, such as something musical or arts related that you'll never do professionally, but it's very, very important to your mental health and the health of your soul. So I think that getting and staying into action is one of the big challenges that humanity faces, in staying in good action. And when I started researching this topic, Billy, I came across some great examples of procrastination that all of us might know. So have you heard of the writer Oscar Wilde?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he's quite well known. He's very famous, and he was French, and I forget the exact century that he lived in. I want to say the 18th century, 18th or 19th. I could be wrong, but he really suffered from procrastination, and it was so bad that he locked himself in his room wearing nothing but a shawl. And there was no central heating back then. It was freezing cold in his little room in Paris. He locked himself in his room wearing nothing but a shawl, and his wife would come, bring him food and such, but that kept him from leaving the room and procrastinating on his writing, because that's what kept the family alive. He went to those kinds of drastic measures. I also have a friend who was working on her law degree, and to prevent herself from procrastinating and not completing the project, and she was not only working on her law degree, but she was a mother of 3 small children. She'd get up at like 4 in the morning and literally tie her legs together so she couldn't leave her desk. Now that's pretty drastic, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would. That's extreme.
It is extreme, And then there's some, among artists, there's some famous stories about procrastinators. One of them that comes to mind is Axl Rose of the groups Guns N' Roses. You've heard of him, right?
Oh yeah, I think everyone pretty much has. Yeah.
Yeah, so Guns N' Roses was like huge, but Axl Rose took their album Chinese Democracy was the most expensive album ever produced, because he was procrastinating so much. It took him 15 years and a third of his life to complete. 15 years and $13 million, making it the world's most expensive album. And he actually went through 8 different guitarists completing that project. So I think that's a pretty massive case of procrastination. Another one is Orson Welles, the great actor. We all know Orson Welles. Toward the end of his life, he had this magnum opus, this film he wanted to create, which he called The Other Side of the Wind, right? And he struggled for 6 years to make the film. He was originally intending to do it in 8 weeks. He struggled for 6 years, passed away. The film was never released. And while he was shooting it, he would revise the script nightly, every single night, driving everybody crazy. So these are some pretty obvious cases of procrastination, but they're here to show you that even the most accomplished people suffer from this nemesis.
So what can we take away from that? Because, famous people, successful people do this, and, just for an ordinary Joe, it just seems like that would, I don't know, does it make sense?
Yeah, sure. So what we need to understand about procrastination, Billy, is that action brings awareness. So sometimes it's easier for people to just do nothing rather than put themselves into action where they will gain all kinds of consciousness. And that includes mostly consciousness about what they don't know. And for a lot of people, certain people idealize themselves, which means they have sort of an idealized view of who they are and what they're able to do. But when you put yourself into action, obviously the rubber meets the road, and you see actually who you are and what you are. Now, it's not always that you're human, and action brings this kind of consciousness, but it also brings consciousness of our talents and of beautiful things within ourselves. The sickest people often become catatonic. Certain mentally ill people will be that way, and it's not uncommon in a mental hospital for some of those patients, poor patients, to actually remain frozen in place. They can't move, or they don't move. And so what some psychiatrists or some mental therapists say is that person is so censored they really can't stand to see anything about themselves. So they prefer to remain inactive rather than put themselves into motion, where they will get feedback and they'll get consciousness about who they are. So now what that means for us is it's something to think about. It really gives a new perspective. And, I think that if you are procrastinating, if you're stalling on doing a very important project for yourself, you have to ask yourself, what is it that this project is showing me that maybe is hard for me to see right now? And let me move forward and see what I need to see. It's not the end of the world, because I'll deal with whatever gaps I see in my skill set and, as they come up.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm sitting here listening to you to explain this, and I can't help but think about Galileo and the law of inertia. Movement is it makes sense. It's very important. It's an important thing where you keep moving forward. And
yeah. And Billy, there is no such thing as no movement. Even when we're sitting still, our bodies are in incredible movement. The creation is movement, and there are those who say that even a rock is moving, that the atoms of the rock are in motion, and so life is movement. And we can't. Our problem as human beings is that we try to deny that. We try to stop it, and we do this often unconsciously. That's the thing. So the question is, how can we become more conscious so that we can see where we're blocked and get ourselves back into action?
So how do you deal with procrastination?
Yeah. Well, just by what I'm describing, I try to, I have a teacher named Dr. Norberto Kepi, who's down in Brazil. I'll talk about him more in a minute, but I try to conscientize what's going on with me. That's a word that he created. So you try to gain an inner awareness of the root of the problem. I do all those things that people do. I keep lists and things like that, and I have calendars. But I personally, I'm much more of an artist type than anything else, than a hard-driving entrepreneur, even though I do have my own business and have for many years. But I think my soul is much more artistic, so I can get quite dreamy and unfocused and, sort of, daydream. And so for me, if I'm not accomplishing things the way that I want to, I have to really step back and say, wow, what is this? what is it about this task that I don't want to see? What is this going to show me about myself that I'm avoiding seeing? And also, what's the upside that I'm avoiding accepting? Dr. Kepi says in his book, The Origin of Illness, and I'll have a resource for everybody at the end of our talk today, Billy. He says the hardest thing for us to accept in life is goodness. So not only do we resist the consciousness that action brings us, but we also unconsciously push back against the goodness that might come to us as a result of getting into action.
So is procrastination a form of like a fear of success, or?
Yeah, it might seem that way, and it's very, very common. People say, oh, we procrastinate because of fear of success. Now, I believe, Billy, that there's no such thing as a fear of success. We fear seeing how we resist our success. That's what's hard for us. Do you get it? It's a subtle distinction. So it's not that we fear success, we fear seeing how we resist success in our life, how we impede our own advancement with our idea, with some of our attitudes about life.
So
that's what's so hard for people to accept.
So how is that again?
Yeah, so people say, oh, you procrastinate because you're afraid of success. And I say, no, we're not so much afraid of success, but we're afraid of seeing how we resist our success.
Okay.
And, so it's very much like we have one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake in our lives. Almost everybody has that. And it's an unconscious thing. And the catch-22 is that once you get into action, you start seeing these things, and so therefore you can fix them.
Is that sort of, the metaphor, the imagery of one foot on the gas and one on the brake, that's kind of like we want success, but we're kind of putting on the brakes because we don't? It's a self-sabotage?
No, internally we want success, logically, of course, everybody wants it, but we're afraid of seeing how we resist our success.
Okay.
And that's the fundamental problem. And it's something that, Freud started to get at toward the end of his life. He called it envy. And Kepi also has done a lot of work on this. And his book, The Origin of Illness, is actually an entire treatise on this resistance we make to goodness in ourselves and in our lives. And again, it's unconscious. It is a fundamental human flaw. There's no one alive who doesn't have this to one extent or another. Most of us, we manage it. It's not not a huge deal. All of us have times in our lives where we self-sabotage, and that's human. But the very sickest of people, the most troubled individuals, are those people that bite the hand that feeds them, that reject, their very lives. So. It's a quality of human nature, and one that can certainly be treated and dealt with.
So I don't know if this is on topic, but when I was talking to your assistant, Mark, he was like, ask Susan about the Titanic. So what is the Titanic?
Okay, sure. I know I wasn't on it. I don't know anybody that was on it. This is a long, long time ago. But the Titanic, of course, famously hit an iceberg and sunk. So it's not so much the Titanic as it is the metaphor of the iceberg, which is the metaphor for our inner lives, Billy. With an iceberg, we see just the top. They could say the top 10% that's poking up above the surface, but beneath that surface is a vast mass of ice that the boat hit and sunk. We are the same way. We have a very rich and deep inner life that contains, our talents and our abilities, most of which we've not yet even gotten in contact with, but it also contains our resistance to those things in ourselves, those parts about ourselves, because of these problems I was just describing, that we wish to hide. It's difficult for us to touch. So that's what I mean about that. That's kind of how consciousness is. And the more you get into action, the more consciousness you have of your resistance and also of your talents and your abilities. So I think if you scratch the surface of any very very successful person. They'll tell you that. They might know how to put on a game face and seem upbeat and, energized in public, but privately, because they are in so much action, they're dealing with this resistance. They're really feeling it within themselves if they're not overtly engaging in sabotaging behaviors, of which we read every day. Famous people, if they don't do themselves in, they marry people that'll do them in, or they hook up with managers and things like that are dishonest or whatever. And so it's not that they're cursed in any way, but it's that they're in action. A lot of stuff is coming up for them that they're resisting to see, and sometimes it manifests in those ways.
So is there a cure for procrastination? I mean, is there some way we can deal with it, move beyond it?
Sure. The cure for it is action, obviously. And I think that you build momentum, Billy. If you can get yourself to start if some of this, what I'm saying today, is helpful to people, hopefully it'll start to it'll get some people to stop and go, wow, I guess that's interesting. Let me do that. I always say to my students that the map appears when the car is in motion. So a lot of people are hesitant to act in their lives because they're waiting to know everything about the subject before they move forward. And that is very paralyzing to people. It's impossible. So we as entrepreneurs learn and know that you have to act and move with 60% of the information. I mean, that's, a fuzzy 60%. Learn just enough, that in ways of being a cure, learn just enough and then take one step, do some action. And the more you do, the more you know. See, we're inverted. We're upside down, like Dr. Kepi says. We calls it an inner inversion, an attitude of inversion, meaning that we think we have to know before we do. But the opposite is true. Action precedes knowing, not the other way around. It's a fundamental mistake in some forms of philosophy, that some kinds of philosophy is inverted and they say you got to know and then the knowledge precedes action. No, it's the other way around. You act and then you know. So I think that if people can kind of have some faith in what I'm talking about right now, they're going to see, wow, they're going to feel so much better as they take some sort of action. Things start becoming clear to them, and then they can move forward. I recall when I started my own business, Billy, how much, because I was working in radio, I had a salary, and I wanted to start my own thing, and so I started teaching voiceover and doing some voiceover on the side while I was still a salaried employee. And I remember, and then after 6 months, I convinced myself that I was going to be okay, that I could replace my income. And I remember when I did that, how much I felt like my mind had expanded. And it was the most incredible feeling when you are self-employed and you're engaged in your projects, that the whole world opens up to you. So action not only brings knowledge, it brings confidence, it brings all kinds of great stuff that you never could ever dream that you have access to.
And I would imagine it would create sort of, I'm thinking again, I'm sorry, I like science and natural law, so a continuum momentum. If you do it, you're gonna pick up speed, right? And just sort of...
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I was going to make that point. Momentum works in our favor, and it is amazing, and it even has mysterious, attractive qualities to it. So case in point, last week was a very active week for me, and I not only I was consulting with all these people, and I was doing a lot last week. And I remember in the middle of the week, I was on a consulting call with this one particular expert. I had bought an hour of his time to consult about my business. And in the middle of that call, while I was on the phone with him, I received 3 huge opportunities to grow my business at that very moment. The two of us, because in that call, the two of us, myself and the expert, we were generating a lot of energy and positive, discussing things about my business and things that was really positive and upbeat. And that power drew to it, that momentum we were creating, all these other opportunities that come completely out of the blue. I think there were like 3 or 4 of them, and it shocked me so much. And I said, wow, this is what I'm resisting doing. I need to, obviously we can't sustain that level of activity all the time, but, you do need to push it forward, and you will be rewarded. It's a law of nature, a law of physics. If you've ever jumped on the phones and tried to build a business, have you ever done that in telemarketing or anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Nobody likes it, right? But if you ever have an intense period of cold calling, or even if you make like 20, 40 calls outbound, almost inevitably you will get some opportunity, if not from the people you call, but from some other completely different area in your life. It's a law of nature. Momentum, you can absolutely count on momentum. It will join you, and it will pick you up, and it will carry you along. If you reach out to it, it will carry you along like an amazing river of energy.
Susan, I went to one of your workshops, it was like 3 years ago, and you opened up talking about talent and responsibility of talent, and it made such a huge impact on me. And maybe it doesn't have anything to do with procrastination today, but it was such a fascinating, life-lasting, changing moment for me. I thought maybe you could explain that because, it might help, people that are listening, our responsibility of talent and everything. So, yeah, no.
Yeah, thank you for that, Billy. I certainly will. So first of all, and again, this is from Dr. Kepi's work. He teaches, and he taught me, that our talents are not for ourselves. They're not for our own aggrandizement. They're gifts given to us by the Creator. And as such, we must give them. We cannot hoard them to ourselves. What we get in return is that our talents are increased, again, in action. They don't increase the more, and a lot of people unconsciously try to hoard them. They feel as if I give them, there will be nothing left for me. And again, this is an inversion that we make because we're raised in thinking that fossil fuel, of course it is, a limited commodity, but true energy doesn't come from fossil fuel. It's from outside ourselves. So we think that if we give the very best of ourselves, we will somehow be depleted, and the total opposite is true. The more you give of your talents, the more you'll have. And you not only is that something that I'm just saying, but we must give of our talents, because by not doing so, it's like dissing the giver of the gift. Somebody created those talents and gave them to you, and by not sharing them and by not giving them, you're maligning the giver of that gift. Was that what touched you?
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I walked away with. Not that you didn't teach a lot of great things. I mean, but for 3 years, it just stuck with me. And I've actually put that into practice. And I've noticed when I'm in my talent zone, putting it into movement, that regardless of all that other thing, it actually makes me happy. There's that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's that. If you're doing what you're supposed to do, I've noticed that life is really good.
Life is great. And not only that, but you start getting inspired. Ideas and energy starts pouring into you that you never would have imagined. And maybe, I know you're a teacher, Billy, as am I, and I know we've all had the experience of being exhausted and having to teach a class or having to go to work, and not just a grunt job, but, real work, and then showing up, doing that work, teaching that class, and then at the end being completely energized. Have you had that experience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an example of what I'm talking about here. When we give the best of ourselves, we are so rewarded. We receive not just an equal burst of energy, inspiration, vitality, it's like 10 times as much. And so when you're getting back to our original topic, which is procrastination, what is procrastination? It's a resistance of doing just that, of jumping into life, using your skills and abilities, sharing them, and allowing other people to benefit from what you have to give, and also being able to receive in return. This is what keeps us alive. This is why people who retire often will die soon after. This is a proven fact. Not everybody, a lot of people retire and they stay active, but many people who just stop when they retire will get sick and die soon afterwards. And that's because we are action. It's not an option in life. We are not just any action. We are good, beautiful, and truthful action. That's our essence. That's who we are. That's what feeds us. So procrastination is resisting that very thing. And so that's why I think it's so valuable for all of us to explore what's going on here, How can we get back into the flow?
Susan, if someone would like to connect with you, and I know you mentioned that you've got some resources for everyone today, and just to like I said, connect with you and to be proactive in getting over this procrastination, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. Well, listen, I would encourage you to go to the following websites for more information about Dr. Keppe's work and all the many people that are teaching courses and their books out there, and it's phenomenal stuff. Go to, and it's a strange website, but it's easy to remember. It's stop, like STOP, .org, O-R-G, .NA for North America. So stop.org. .NA. This is a nonprofit organization that whose mission is to further Dr. Keppe's work. So that's one thing that you can do. And the second is you can write to me at greatvoice.com. Just send an email to Susan at greatvoice.com and let me know what's on your mind. I'll get back to you. I can hook you up with other people that are studying this stuff. You'll find Dr. Keppe's books. Some of them are on Amazon, translated into English. He's Brazilian, so they're originally written in Portuguese. But, Google him on Amazon. You'll find some of his books, and go to stop.org.na and research this further.
And Susan, you've given so much already, but I was hoping that you could leave us with some parting advice as well.
Sure. Okay, so parting advice about procrastination. The map appears when the car is in motion. Don't forget that. And here's a good one. We never procrastinate about going to the casino, going to the mall, overeating, spending too much on shopping, right? We never procrastinate about that stuff. So probably if you're procrastinating in your life, you're procrastinating against doing something really good for yourself and other people. So think about that, and hopefully that's going to propel you into action, because I can promise you the reward is more than you ever dreamed of.
That's excellent advice, and thank you so much for that. And Susan, I want to thank you again for coming on the show, sharing your expertise, spending time with us today, and helping us to get over procrastination.
Thank you, Billy, and thank you for sharing your talents in this wonderful podcast.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.